Yeah, I don't want them anywhere near with my knives out.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But I heard a Chinese man, she's American Chinese, Lang Lang. No, pianist.
Oh, yeah, it's labeled it.
Right?
Labeled it.
The what?
Labeled
That's
it.
how I play the piano. It's a
Weekend.
I don't know if you know.
The Labor Day, yeah. Oh, you wonder why so few?
Yeah.
I think she's
Yeah,
using the
people
same
taking
thing.
those, you know.
She's
Right.
around by it.
Oh my God, you know, Mista's in college now.
Yeah, no,
She's actually homesick.
Oh, really? Oh.
And on top of that, she caught COVID.
Really?
Yeah,
Why it goes around?
yeah.
To my knowledge, I've yet to get it yet. I do plan to get vaccinated again this fall.
Oh, yeah.
I'm figuring it's gonna be like flu, you're pretty much gonna have to get annual vaccination. Not going away.
You can't keep on a good diet either, can
Yeah,
you?
it's evolving, so we need a
Like
vaccination.
you're doing well.
I'm making a habit of giving flu and COVID shot at the same time, but
Pretty good. Oh, you gotta be praying about this. It'll be, a picnic next.
Yes.
Okay.
No, really.
Oh, look, it's here. Not zero.
Oh, my goodness.
I need to open up the aisle. For later today, go loud. This way. That's all, honey. How you doing? Good morning. Pretty good, and you? Good to see you.
But sometimes
Oh,
I
okay.
have
Well,
Good morning.
Good morning and welcome to this virtual and in-person service of the Idaho Falls Unitarian Universalist Church on this first day of September 2024. Am I close enough to the mic? Okay. Okay, we welcome you. We know you come here for different reasons, to find community, to seek your spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to be nurtured, to explore new ideas, to find comfort, and perhaps
Okay. Put on the desk. Okay. All right. Sure.
I don't know how
Oh, well, I'm glad. So you
Gotta get pick up. We have more. Good. Hope you enjoy this service. I hope you come back.
Oh, not.
Yeah, well, excellent. Everybody's been nice to me so far. That's, this is our just. Pretty good. Good to see you.
That's good to go.
I can say more than this.
We will now begin our service.
Ringing the Peace Bowl. Let us prepare ourselves for worship. Calm our hearts, our minds, our breathing. Breathe deeply in and out, listening to your breath as I ring the Peace Bowl 3 times. We will now begin our service with our prelude. Our church's covenant helps us remember why we are a part of this faith and why we give our time and our resources to this congregation. If you so choose, please recite along with me the covenant that this congregation has chosen to live by. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now light the chalice. The chalice lighting is accompanied by words from Christine Robinson. We gather this hour as a people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life that we share together.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is one of my favorite poems of all time, The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound and fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 1, May Nothing Evil Cross This Door.
May nothing evil cross this door, and may ill fortune never pry about these windows. May the roar and rain go by. By faith made strong, the rafters will withstand the battering of the storm. This hearth, though all the world grow chill, will keep you warm. Peace shall walk softly through these rooms, touching our lips with holy wine, till every casual corner blooms into a shrine. With laughter drown the raucous shout, and though these sheltering walls are thin, may they be strong to keep hate out and hold love in.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm sharing the tale of Amira's Porpoise by Chrissy Buschjager. So today, I'm going to tell a story about a girl who was searching for a porpoise. Now, as many of you know, a porpoise is a sea mammal in the dolphin family. Porpoises are smaller and shyer than dolphins. They are more difficult to find, but porpoises are very important. So, there once was a girl named Amira, and all she wanted for her birthday was a porpoise of her very own. She wished and hoped and dreamed of a porpoise. She asked her parents and her grandparents. She told all her friends at school that she was getting a porpoise for her birthday. But her birthday came and went, and she did not get a porpoise. She was disappointed, and she wanted answers. So she asked her parents, and they said, "Oh, Amira, we couldn't get you a porpoise. That is something you need to seek out for yourself." Amira looked at her parents kind of funny and said, "You know I said porpoise, right? Like the sea mammal that's smaller than a dolphin." And her parents looked at each other and said, "Oops, but you can't have a wild animal for your birthday anyway." She asked her grandparents, and they said, "Oh, Amira, we cannot get you a porpoise. You'll have to figure out your purpose when you're older. And sometimes even adults don't know their own purpose." Now, at this point, Amira was getting a little annoyed. "I said porpoise, porpoise, like the sea mammal, like a small dolphin." Her grandparents said, Oh, well, sorry, we misheard you. But we wouldn't have bought you a porpoise anyway. They belong in the wild, my dear. Amira was fuming mad. Why? Why had no one understood her when she wanted a porpoise? And now that she thought about it, why were the adults unwilling to give her a purpose either? What was a purpose anyway? So Amira set about finding a purpose. Over the next several years, she asked a lot of adults that she knew and trusted. Some of the adults said, "I don't know. That's a really hard thing to explain." But some of the adults gave her some good advice. They said, "Pay attention to the things you care about and how you can use those things to make a difference in the world. You may not have a clear idea about it yet, and your purpose will certainly change over time. But if you think about the things you value and how you can use those things for good, you'll be on the right track." So Amira thought about the things that she valued and cared about, things like animals and the habitats they live in. She thought about things she liked to do, things like learning new things and teaching those things to younger children. She thought about her heroes, people who were living their lives in ways that she wanted to copy. And she thought about what was possible and ways that she could change the world when she was older. And eventually, after some time and some work, Amira came up with her purpose. And the funny thing is, Amira's purpose didn't stray too far from porpoises. She decided that her purpose was to be a caring advocate for the earth and teach others about conservation. And that is what she did. I see no children this morning, so we will proceed to sharing the joys and concerns.
Reverend Kevin will light a candle as I read the joys and concerns. The first one is from Roby. A joy. So glad Bob is recovering nicely from his hip surgery. We're glad to be back. That's great. Don't want to miss one here. From Karen Croft. Okay. Sorry. So did you hear the one about Bob recovering from surgery? Okay. From Karen Croft, a concern. My friend Marie has ovarian cancer. Please light a candle for her during her treatment period. That's pretty serious. From Victoria, a sorrow. A good friend in Ketchikan died on Thursday. There's much sadness over his death. It was a day after a landslide in Ketchikan that wiped out 5 or 6 houses and killed one man cleaning out storm drains. That was a pretty serious landslide there in Ketchikan. And a joy from Victoria. I have 10 young milkweeds growing and found 15 more on the canal bank close to my house. That's great. I can't get them to grow. From Rosie, a joy. Welcome Hannah, her first time here. And we will light one more joy and one more candle for those joys and concerns that we keep in our hearts.
Our reading this morning is from the book The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming by David Wallace Wells. Beginning in 2011, about 1 million Syrian refugees were unleashed on Europe by a civil war inflamed by climate change and drought. And in a very real sense, much of the populist movement the entire West is passing through now is the result of panic produced by the shock of those migrants. The likely flooding of Bangladesh threatens to create 10 times as many, or more, received by a world that will be even further destabilized by climate chaos, and one suspects less receptive the browner those in need. And then there will be the refugees from sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the rest of South Asia. 140 million by 2050, the World Bank estimates, meaning more than 100 times Europe's Syrian crisis. The UN projections are bleaker. 200 million climate refugees by 2050. 200 million was the entire world population at the peak of the Roman Empire. If you can imagine every single person alive and living anywhere on the planet at that time dispossessed of their home and turned outward to wander through hostile territories in search of a new one. The high end of what's possible in the next 30 years, the United Nations says, is considerably worse. 1 billion or more vulnerable poor people with little choice but to fight or flee. 1 billion or more. That was the entire global population as recently as 1820, with the Industrial Revolution well underway. Those refugee figures are high-end estimates produced years ago by research groups designed to call attention to a particular cause or crusade. The true numbers will almost surely fall short of them, and scientists tend to trust projections in the tens of millions rather than the hundreds of millions. But that those bigger numbers are only the far upper reaches of what is possible should not lull us into complacency. High-end estimates establish the boundaries of what's possible, between which we can better conceive of what is likely. And perhaps they will prove better guides even than that, considering the optimists have never, in the half-century of climate anxiety we've already endured, been right. An offering to support the mission of this church will now be given and gratefully received. If you watched the roll call vote formally confirming Kamala Harris as the Democrats' presidential nominee during the recent Democratic National Convention, with its unforgettable state-themed music and live performance by the rap artist Lil Jon, you may remember the delegates from the Northern Mariana Islands who were festooned with tropical flowers. The Northern Mariana Islands, officially the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, is not a state, of course, but an unincorporated territory and commonwealth of the United States, consisting of an archipelago of 14 islands in the northwestern Pacific Ocean. The islands have a long history of foreign occupation, and they came into U.S. possession after the Battle of Saipan in 1944. One of the three principal islands, Tinian, was made famous as the place where the bomber Enola Gay took off on August 6, 1945, on its way to drop the atomic bomb on Japan. The islands became an official U.S. territory in 1986, and the inhabitants became U.S. citizens. As is typical, when called upon to record their delegate votes, each state or territory introduces themselves with some remarks about what makes their home unique and special. And in this case, Nola Hicks, who is the executive director of the Democratic Party of the Northern Mariana Islands, said, "We are the Northern Mariana Islands, where our customs, our culture, our land and oceans bring life into our people. The earth is not red or blue. The earth is sick, and we must protect it." It was the most straightforward ecological statement I heard during the entire convention. For Nola Hicks and other residents of the Earth's many small islands, climate change poses an ecological and existential threat that they feel more immediately than the rest of us who live on Earth's major continents. Rising sea levels caused by the accelerated melting of sea ice in the polar regions and the melting of millennia of accumulated ice deposits in the Greenland ice sheet threaten to overwhelm the Northern Mariana Islands and other island nations. Even a modest sea level rise will be catastrophic, and current projections are for at least a roughly 1 meter rise by the year 2100. This will cause around 80% of all coastal communities worldwide to be inundated, forcing mass or total relocations or evacuations of the inhabitants. And yet, some politicians still suggest climate change is either a hoax or will produce more desirable beachfront property for us to enjoy. This is no joke for the residents of island nations. It is already happening. And when we speak about a rising tide of environmental crises due to human-caused climate change, it isn't just a metaphor for coastal residents around the world. Some island nations will simply be erased from the map. Human-caused climate change is not just an ecological or environmental issue. It is a moral issue that will impact billions of human lives, and it demands our attention. We are, of course, safe from sea level rise here in Idaho, but we face other climate change impacts, such as drought and an increase in wildfire frequency and severity. And the fact is that climate refugees fleeing rising sea levels and all sorts of climate disruptions will directly or indirectly impact almost everyone on Earth, no matter where we live. As our reading described, you can already demonstrate a link between climate refugees and the rise of right-wing nationalism and anti-immigrant sentiment in Europe, and it could get much worse. Just think of the incredible impact rising sea levels will have on infrastructure along America's coastlines alone. Probably trillions of dollars are at risk. When I was on the way to attend a conference in Fort Lauderdale several years ago, I remember looking out the airplane window as we flew over the Everglades and the Florida coast and thinking about what rising sea levels and an increase in the frequency of hurricanes could do to this region. Routine flooding is already affecting Miami. And if hurricane intensity and frequency increases as expected, the human cost may be horrific. But this is not breaking news. An army of scientists and activists have been warning us for decades about the urgent need for action if we are to prevent the worst case scenarios from coming to pass. But most of the world continues onward in an oblivious march toward disaster. In a 2008 article published in the Journal of the Yale School of the Environment titled The Ethics of Climate Change, atmospheric scientist Richard Somerville wrote, "A world in which all human beings were equal, rational, and perfectly governed, when confronted with the prospect of global warming, might reach an optimal decision based on compelling climate science. That ideal world would then find effective international agreements to restrict greenhouse gas emissions and avoid harmful climate change. We do not live in such a world." Somerville's sentiment is an understatement, to say the least. But we cannot let the fact that in the foreseeable future we are unlikely to achieve a world in which all human beings are equal, rational, and perfectly governed, prevent us from acting as best we can, as soon as we can, with every resource we can muster, to do something now. Perhaps we would be better off if Earth Day 1990 had galvanized the world into greater action, or if Al Gore had prevailed in the 2000 presidential election. But we have unfortunately lost more than a quarter of a century of opportunity since global warming began to be discussed in the popular media. Our collective complacency, political dithering, and even outright denialism about the reality of climate change has brought us to the present state. And we are already witnessing the fruits of our inaction. It is almost a bad joke to hear meteorologists speak about a 500 or 1,000 year flood event impacting a region when these events seem to be happening every year. It is also alarming to see recent heat indexes that have exceeded 150 degrees Fahrenheit in parts of the Middle East and South Asia. It may be a novelty to take a selfie at the Death Valley Visitor Center in front of a sign reading 132 degrees, but when those kinds of temperatures are experienced in places where millions of people are trying to live, it is unsustainable. Human beings could eventually create an Earth that is uninhabitable for our species and countless others. Earth will endure, and extremophile life forms may be able to survive on such a planet. But forget about most of the animals and plants we know today. Even apart from the human impact, the premature extinction of so many life forms represents an obvious moral failure that sounds like something we should wish to avoid. Climate change is happening now, and only the willfully ignorant or incredibly delusional can look at the data and anecdotal evidence and deny this reality. Each year eclipses the last as the hottest on record. But no matter how many climate deniers gain positions of power around the world, Earth doesn't care. We must eventually choose to respond to the moral crisis of climate change or surely perish. Fortunately, I believe there are far more of us who care than those who don't. But again, we must find a way to do something. In his article, Somerville went on to describe what he called the three major ethical dilemmas now complicating the climate change debate. How to balance the rights and responsibilities of the developed and developing world. How to evaluate geoengineering schemes designed to reverse or slow climate change. And how to assess our responsibility to future generations who must live with a climate we are shaping today. The first ethical dilemma he identifies points to the intersectional nature of environmental justice issues on several levels. It is a fact that we in the developed world bear most of the blame for climate change because of our unsustainable, carbon-belching lifestyles Yet the most disastrous impacts will likely be endured by those in the developing world due to geographic and economic factors. There's talk among progressive leaders around the world about providing some kind of climate reparations to assist developing countries suffering the greatest impacts. But while this is a laudable idea, I suspect the severity of the need will soon overwhelm the world's financial resources, no matter how altruistic our intentions. Droughts, the desertification of croplands, and flooding are already creating climate refugees, and wars, pestilence, and suffering follow close behind. Those who simply wish to ignore or deny the problems should be reminded that desperate people will always find a way to survive, no matter how many walls you build to keep them out. As someone I read years ago once quipped, if you think the wars over oil are bad, just wait till the wars over water begin. The second ethical dilemma Somerville notes is how to evaluate geoengineering schemes designed to reverse or slow climate change. I'm sure that clever scientists and engineers will develop schemes to help mitigate atmospheric carbon, and some of these, such as various carbon sequestration methods, should certainly be considered and implemented. But there are some ideas that are so risky and global in scale that I'm not convinced that our moral values and legal systems are sufficiently evolved to give them proper scrutiny. Big ideas like seeding the atmosphere with compounds to reflect light away from Earth might be feasible. But science fiction authors have easily imagined scenarios where the results went terribly wrong, ending in an unforeseen cataclysm. Who can morally or legally evaluate the risks and determine whether we should proceed with such plans? Even the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is required by its mandate to be policy neutral in their reports. And how many Pacific Islanders or citizens of the developing world will get a say and weigh in on such policies? World leaders can't even enact a ceasefire in Gaza and fulfill the promise of a two-state solution in the face of incredible death and suffering. Now even a resurgence of polio among Palestinian children. And this is only one example that poses no potential risk for the Earth's very biosphere. Who can we trust with such monumental decisions about climate change mitigation? I believe that Somerville's third ethical dilemma is actually the easiest to address: how to assess our responsibility to future generations who must live with a climate we are shaping today. Human beings may be divided by religion, politics, or a host of other cultural contrivances, but we cannot escape the fact that we share a common biological bond. We are one species, and we will only continue to thrive as a species if we are able to protect the future that our descendants will inherit. We already know that our collective unsustainable lifestyle decisions must change for future generations to inherit a reasonable planet. Again, this is not breaking news. And we don't need new scientific breakthroughs or luck to make a difference. We need only the political will and sacrificial spirit to do so. Scientific innovations like greener energy sources and carbon sequestration will help, of course, but more helpful still would be the ancient traditional wisdom of evaluating our decisions with consideration for 7 generations to come after us. We can probably never imagine the technological and social changes humanity will experience 7 generations hence, but we can be cognizant of the poor decisions we make now that will likely make the world a more toxic and challenging place regardless. Climate change is simply the greatest existential threat the world faces today, and with it comes a host of intersectional moral issues from mass extinctions to human rights. It is important for each of us to find a purpose, like Amira in our Time for All Ages story, a cause that appeals to our moral values and sense of justice. It is important that we work to end racism and other forms of oppression, to end economic injustice and inequality, and to end violence in all its forms. There are endless opportunities to make this a better world. And to be frank, some of these justice issues may be more appealing because they seem to be easier to tackle in comparison to global climate change. But to quote our beloved Henry David Thoreau, what is the use of a house if you haven't got a tolerable planet to put it on? I realize I'm probably preaching to the choir when I talk to a bunch of Unitarian Universalists about the existential moral challenge of climate change and how it is fundamental to every justice issue we can imagine. But sometimes even we need to be reminded about the urgency and criticality of our situation. And many of our neighbors really need to hear this. One of the newly minted value statements in our denomination says, "We honor the interdependent web of all existence. With reverence for the great web of life and with humility, we acknowledge our presence in it. We covenant to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relations." If we take our Unitarian Universalist faith seriously, I would argue that responding to the moral challenge of climate change must become an even more urgent and central focus of our justice efforts. So what can we do? First, there are still too many people who are ignorant or in denial about the reality of climate change, in part because the impacts can be largely invisible in our daily lives. Usually our landscape and environment changes imperceptibly over the course of centuries or millennia on a geological, not human timescale. But sometimes nature surprises us, like the suddenness of the hydrothermal explosion at Biscuit Basin in Yellowstone in July. We may witness an abrupt and even frightening demonstration of nature's power, and climate change has already started to humble us with weather events. The other reason for ignorance and confusion about climate change is more sinister. Intentional disinformation spread by politicians and corporations with a short-sighted, vested financial interest in the status quo. To cut through the fog of disinformation and raise awareness of the issue, we must educate everyone we can, formally or informally. It is promising that younger generations are growing up much more aware of the climate crisis than their elders. But too many of us older folks still control the political discourse and need to understand why climate change is so important. Talk to your neighbors about why you're making certain consumer choices or why you're showing up to March for Action. You can help educate the public in community settings with presentations like Al Gore's famous slideshow featured in An Inconvenient Truth. 6 years ago, I attended training with Al Gore's Climate Reality Project to help offer these presentations to the public, and I am determined to find ways to do this more often going forward. If you have any venues to suggest for this, please let me know. So far, the Climate Reality Project has trained thousands of presenters from 192 countries and every generation to educate people around the world. If you might be interested in this, I refer you to their website, climaterealityproject.org. You can also attend a march or rally demanding action on climate change if you're physically able. This might be some small local event or one of the huge national or international calls to action. The two largest public witness events I am proud to have joined were the March against Keystone XL Pipeline in Washington, D.C., and the People's Climate March in New York City. If you ever get a chance to experience such an event where hundreds of thousands of like-minded people come together for a cause, let me assure you it is a life-changing moment you will never forget. Sometimes the presence of our physical bodies is what is needed to speak truth to power. I am also pleased to announce another great opportunity that will be held here at this church the last weekend of September. On September 28th and 29th, our congregation will be participating with UU congregations across America in a UU Climate Justice Revival event titled Reimagine Together from an Extractive Age to a New Era. It is billed as an opportunity to build relationships between climate justice organizing and democracy work. And it includes an organizing hour focused on relational organizing in this election cycle, anchored by the event's worship and interactive workshops that invite UUs around the country to collectively reimagine a spirit-filled and liberatory future. So stay tuned for more details in coming days on our website and in the weekly email updates. It sounds exciting, and I will be attending a workshop for facilitators soon to help make this happen. So much is at stake during this election cycle, including undoing the precious little progress we have made on addressing climate change. Our denomination may be small, but we are joined by climate activists from many faith traditions into a powerful voice that our politicians ignore at their own peril. Friends, it is clear that we are already entering an unknown era of climate upheaval that will try our souls, an era filled with disastrous weather events and ramifications we can only imagine. The ice is melting faster than our worst predictions a few decades ago, and sea levels are rising. Some of the future damage is already beyond our control. You read about the situation, the dire situation in Antarctica in particular, where scientists are anxiously monitoring melting on the Thwaites Glacier, which has been given the ominous nickname, the Doomsday Glacier. The simple truth is that humans have never encountered a climate that is changing as quickly as we are now experiencing. Nothing so abrupt on a planetary scale has occurred in Earth's history since the era when our species evolved. One wonders how this will change the way we look at the world. When we realize beyond any remaining delusions that the world is no longer the static creation we long imagined. We are facing an existential crisis that makes it easy to give in to anxiety and despair. But there is also a rising tide of informed climate activists starting to make a difference, particularly among the younger generations who have the most at stake. There is still time to avoid the worst case scenarios and even start to mitigate some of the other lesser ones. I also find it comforting to remember that ancient peoples endured the most recent ice age, and they likely witnessed and survived cataclysmic events like the Great Bonneville Flood on the Snake River about 14,500 years ago. Our species is pretty resilient and clever, so I don't count us out. But if we are to survive, each of us needs to find the strength and will to do our part, to be part of the rising tide of positive change, even if we feel like drops of water in an ocean of crisis. May it be so. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit once again and join in singing our closing hymn, number 12, O Life That Maketh All Things New. Our closing words are also from the book The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming by David Wallace Wells. Even before the age of climate change, the literature of conservation furnished many metaphors to choose from. James Lovelock gave us the Gaia hypothesis, which conjured an image of the world as a single, evolving quasi-biological entity. Buckminster Fuller popularized Spaceship Earth, which presents the planet as a kind of desperate life raft in what Archibald MacLeish called the enormous empty night. The Voyager 1 space probe gave us the pale blue dot, the inescapable smallness and fragility of the entire experiment we're engaged in together, whether we like it or not. Personally, I think that climate change itself offers the most invigorating picture, in that even in its cruelty, flatters our sense of power, and in so doing calls the world as one to action. At least I hope it does. You can choose your metaphor. You can't choose the planet, which is the only one any of us will ever call home.
Please join me in reading the words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.